Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with a brand new movie review, and this is a big one. This is a franchise that means a lot to me. Now, I can admit there are some pretty bad films in this franchise, but it's near and dear to my heart. We're talking about Spiral from the Book of Saw, which is the 9th film in the Saw franchise. It's not a reboot, it's not a sequel, but it takes place in the same universe, and I'm really excited to let you all know what I thought about this film. And I want to thank Lionsgate for allowing me to see the screener early, and we're gonna break it down in this review. I'm gonna talk about my pros, my cons as both a Saw fan and also, a critic, if you want to call me that. And also, I'm gonna kind of give you all my rankings of where this kind of falls for me, and ultimately let you know if it's worth checking out. All in this spoiler-free review. But before we dive into it, make sure you're following me on all my other social media accounts. If you're new to the channel, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way, you can get the alert when I drop new content. It would mean a lot to me if you all can like and share this review. It helps out the channel a lot, but I also appreciate all the support. And in those comments, I'm talking to my Saw fans, horror fans, and my fans of movies in general. What was your anticipation and excitement level for Spiral, the Book of Saw? And once you all have seen it, let's talk about it in the comments. Let me know your pros, your cons, your thoughts on the performances, the story. Did you think the comedy and the horror mixed well? What did you think about the traps, and what was your favorite trap? And then also, just kind of speaking to the Saw franchise, where does this film rank for you amongst the other 8 films? And after you've seen this movie, word around town is that they want to do a Saw TV series in the future. And then just the other day that they are working on the 10th Saw. So after you've seen Spiral, are you excited for more Saw movies or potentially Saw TV show? Let's talk about it in the comments. So for me personally, I mentioned it up top, I'm a Saw fan through and through. I can acknowledge there are some really bad Saw movies in this franchise, but dating back to 2004's Saw, directed by James Wan, that is like top 15 horror film of all time for me personally. I love 2, I love 3. 4 is an okay Saw film. 4 is kind of when it went off the rails a little bit. 5, 6, 7, 8 are like not good movies. They're not good Saw movies. They're not good movies in general. But going back to my love of Saw, kind of getting excited for Spiral, because I'm not gonna lie, the trailers didn't really sell me. I was gonna see this film regardless, but I wasn't a fan of the trailer because it was almost like it was a parody of Saw. And then hearing some of the stuff that Chris Rock said in regards to how he came up with the idea, how he wanted to bring more comedy to the franchise, got me a little nervous, because comedy and horror, when done right, listen, I mean, literally, you're scared and laughing at the same time. That's such an entertaining experience. But when done wrong, it can be a very poorly, bad, just a terrible experience when horror and comedy don't mix well. So I was a little bit on the fence about that, especially after those trailers. But I got excited because, again, you have someone like Darren Lynn Bousman, who's the director of Spiral, who was also the director of Saw 2, 3, and 4, but at least you have someone that's familiar with the franchise. So the way I want to handle this review as a Saw fan, I'm going to talk about my positives and negatives as a Saw fan, but also give you my positives and negatives as just a movie fan and a critic, if you want to call me that. So going into my positives as a Saw fan, the reason I love Saw, especially the first 3 Saws, is the cat and mouse game, the whodunit aspect, the detective looking for this serial killer, killing these people for a particular reason and figuring out what that reason is why I love these films. But then also, I'm a horror fan. I grew up in horror. I saw horror films at a very young age when I wasn't supposed to. I always love blood, guts, and when you give me a good trap in a Saw franchise, it's the icing on the cake, ladies and gentlemen. I know some people get grossed out. They call this franchise torture porn, which to each his own. I don't think it's that. I will say some elements in the back half of Saw kind of gets into that torture porn category, but they're, again, the first 3 Saws, they were clever, they were unique, they had really good storytelling, and there was motives behind the traps, right? So that's kind of my fandom in the trap area. So going into the positives as a Saw fan, I think for the most part, Spiral delivers in those departments. I think going back to Danny Glover as a detective, trying to figure out who Jigsaw was, discovering who John Kramer was, and then giving it into, fast forward to, 17 years later, Chris Rock and Sam Jackson are kind of complementing that role that Danny Glover played in regards to figuring out, okay, we know Jigsaw isn't doing this, who is doing this? We have a copycat killer on our hands. So seeing their journey, trying to discover who this new copycat killer is, was very entertaining. And again, the whodunit detective cat and mouse game was very appealing and very compelling for the most part in this film. And then going back to me being a horror fan, a Saw fan, the traps are pretty brutal. I thought that the majority of the traps are about I want to say 4 traps in this film, and I thought all 4 were pretty creative for the most part. And one trap in particular, which is this is public knowledge, that they released it on YouTube the other day. The opening of the film, that trap involved in tongue. The reason, again, I like the traps in Saw, especially in the first 3, is how like personal the traps are to the victim in the trap. You know, you think of Amanda, you think of the drug dealers, you think of the lawyer, you think of the cop that, you know, killed people for no reason. That particular opening sequence revolving around the cop who lies in court and having to pick between his tongue, which he's lied on his own, you know, tongue, or, you know, being hit by a train. That is what gets me so like fascinated by the Saw franchise, because I put myself in that position. What would you do, right? Would you let your tongue be ripped out or be hit by a train? So that first opening sequence was one of my favorite traps in this film. And then there's another trap that I won't get into details that involves fingers. That was pretty gross and pretty awesome at the same time. So I thought that, again, the cat and mouse game, the traps were, as a Saw fan, were pretty top notch in my opinion, pretty clever, as I may say. And then going back to another thing that I liked about this film as a Saw fan, I appreciated the nods. I appreciated the Easter eggs for the original Saw. There's literally, without giving too much away, it's in the trailer, but there is a Saw in this film that dates back to the original Saw. And there's also, you know, there's a name drop of John Kramer. And again, this is not a reboot. This is not a sequel. This is just canon in the same universe. So I appreciated the acknowledgement of the other Saw films, and particularly the first 3, but then also the acknowledgement of the incredible score. That first Saw film, whenever I hear that dun 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 dun, I go back to 2004, having that big reveal of who was in the room the whole time. That is one of my favorite reveals of all time. So whenever I hear that score, it just gets me, as a Saw fan, just gets me excited. It gives me chills because I go back to that first big reveal in that film. So those are some things as a Saw fan that I really appreciate about the film. Going to the critical pros of this review, I mentioned Chris Rock. He's a GOAT. He's a legend. He's a comedic genius. Him in movies and films are kind of 50-50 for me. I recently watched him in the recent season of Fargo. I thought he was a pretty good character, and I thought he did a really good job in acting. In this movie, I thought Chris Rock, as the lead detective, as the lead of this film, I enjoyed his comedic beats. I enjoyed the levity that he brought to the film. And I was a little bit nervous about that because, again, comedy and horror don't mix well. But in this film, for the most part, the jokes worked for me, as this Chris Rock is playing this, again, this brash cop who's almost like, for my Beverly Hills Cops fans out there, he was almost like if you put Axel Foley in the Saw franchise, it's Chris Rock's character. He has the charm, the charisma. He's a pissed off cop. He has reasons for being pissed off because his other companions, his brothers in arms, aren't a fan of how he gets things done. And he also has some skeletons in his closet that makes tension or makes, you know, moments around other cops a little bit tense filled. So I really enjoy what that particular Chris Rock character, Zeke, was able to bring to the franchise, because the levity, it worked for the most part. Again, I would say it's as Axel Foley was in the Saw franchise, and that's what you get with Chris Rock. And then even Sam Jackson, it's Sam Jackson in this movie. Is really not a character you're seeing in this film, as, you know, Zeke's dad, as this detective that is revered in his police department. But it's Sam Jackson. He has his, you know, Sam Jackson moments, his one-liners that were pretty funny and worked in most of the film. I'll say that. But going into another thing that I thought was just kind of refreshing was the fact that they were able to kind of play within the Saw movie and the seriousness that's going on, because, you know, all the Saw films have like a little bit over the top of like too serious going on in the film. So I like that this film was refreshing in the sense that they were able to add a bit of levity, a little bit more jokes and moments that you normally don't see in the Saw films. And I thought for the most part it worked and balanced out itself pretty well. And then lastly, I would say I appreciated that this film was in and out. It's an hour and 30 minutes. It knows what it is. It gets to the point, and I don't think that any Saw film should be over an hour and 40, and this is an hour and 30, so kudos to you guys for being in and out, having a story, and moving on. So I appreciate that about the film. So transitioning to my criticisms. So again, I want to handle this as a Saw fan and that, you know, be critical of the film as well. I can acknowledge 5, 6, 7, 8 aren't well. And whenever I see a Saw film, it's like a thrill seeker that jumps out of a plane for the first time. They're always seeking that adrenaline rush. And I'm always looking for that adrenaline rush that I got from the first 3 Saws. And let's just get it out of the way. I'm going to get out my nitpicks first and foremost. I was not a fan of the Copycat's voice. Again, I love Jigsaw's do you want to play a game? Live or die. Like, I love that voice. This voice in this film, do you want to, I can't even impersonate it. I thought it wasn't intimidating. It wasn't scary. I wasn't a fan of the voice. So I'll put that there. The Billy the Puppet's not in this film. They have this kind of pig-like character. I wasn't a fan of that. And then last but not least, again, these are just nitpicks. They aren't like, they don't make or break my thoughts of the film, even though I wasn't a fan of the voice. But the transitions, if you all remember the original Saws, how creative they were, this is just more of a thing I miss about the original Saws, how they would transition from one scene to the next. They were very creative. It doesn't have that creative flair that I enjoyed about those first couple Saws. So going into really my nitty gritty of a Saw fan and my criticisms, it's the same song and dance, right? We've seen this story before in regards to the foundation of the film, the approach of the crooked cops and figuring out why these cops were crooked and what they'd done in the past and discovering all this stuff. And we see this copycat killer wants justice. We've seen this in literally every single Saw film. Whether you replace a cop or detective with a FBI agent, you replace that FBI agent with a SWAT team member, it's the same song and dance. So it's very unoriginal in the story department, which speaks to a little bit of the traps, right? I mentioned that I was a fan of the traps, but in regards to being a Saw fan, the original Saws, they were meant to inflict pain. They were meant to be brutal and bloody, but they were also meant to be able to escape the traps, but leaving you with a permanent scar to remember your wrongdoings. In this film, the balance of being able to escape the traps, there were moments where it's like, yeah, they could have easily got out of the trap, easily by a sense of like permanently having damage to themselves, but they could have got out. And then mixing in, there were moments that they couldn't have got out. Like literally there were moments that you would just die regardless if you made it out of the trap or not. So I didn't like how the film wasn't able to balance the whole idea of what John Kramer's, his ideology was in regards to getting these people in a position. So I wasn't a fan of how they it felt uneven in regards to the traps and being able to make it out or not. So another thing that kind of speaks to an unevenness is I applaud the jokes, but some of the jokes felt a little bit forced, as well as the tonal shifts of like the serious nature of the Saw franchise and Chris Rock and Sam Jackson being in this franchise, which I welcome, but it just didn't balance out that well in my personal taste, because there were moments, and this was like unintentional comedy from the supporting characters, the rookie cop, the chief of the department, and the other cops. To me, they were like in two different movies. So like again, I feel like I was watching a parody of Saws at points in a fun way, like a scary movie type of fun way. But then it was just like these characters are just like not in the same room, not in the same tonal shift, not in the same scene as Chris Rock and Sam Jackson's character, which brings me to the individual performances of our two leads. And this is more the critical aspect of the film. The father and son relationship, I didn't feel it. I didn't buy it. I don't feel like they had much chemistry. I'm pretty sure they're probably good friends off the set. I don't believe Chris Rock and Sam Jackson have worked together in the past. I'm sure they've crossed paths many of times, but I never felt their chemistry, which really sucks because there was some conflict between the son and his Chris Rock and Sam Jackson, but I just didn't buy into their relationship. And then individually speaking, Chris Rock, the levity, the jokes for the most part worked. When needed to be serious, when needed to be dramatic, that stuff did not work for me. I feel like when he had the approach of having the cop that has a chip on his shoulder for stuff that he did in the past, but then when we would get to the more serious father-son relationship, I need to figure out what's going on, where's my partner, where's my chief, all those dramatic moments for me, for Chris Rock, didn't work. And then going to one of my favorite actors of all time, Sam Jackson. This is Sam Jackson, guys, which is a good thing and also a bad thing, because it's just Sam Jackson saying one-liners, not really being a character. It felt like they had him on set for maybe like a couple hours, and they just kind of like, we need you here, and you can feel like Sam Jackson, I don't want to say he was mailing it in, but when he needed to step up in the dramatic roles, which he's a great dramatic actor, he's one of the greatest of all time in my opinion, it just felt like he was mailing it in and felt like he was having more fun with the jokes and the levity. But again, going back to the serious nature of the story, it just didn't work for me personally. And then also there's some other performances like the rookie cop, the chief detective, and then all the surrounding detectives that were involved in the story. Again, they just felt like they were in a completely different movie. And again, they were playing more serious. Chris Rock and Sam Jackson were playing a little bit more in the comedy, and it just at times it flowed, but for the majority of the film, it just didn't flow well to me. And then lastly, when it comes to the ending of the movie, I just got to say I'm not excited for if they continue this story. I wouldn't be excited to explore more, because I found the ending as a Saw fan in the mystery box to be very, very predictable. If you've seen all the Saw films like I have. They they show their hand a little bit too early for me in the film, and the whole idea of Saw 1, 2, and 3 is, even though after you know who the killer is and you figure out what's the meaning behind everything, it's still fun to revisit those films to kind of pick out, oh, that's what meant that. And even though the film shows you, like, they go back and show you all the little Easter eggs of the person revealing who they are, I knew who the big, I'll just say I know the twist. And when you see the twist, you're just like, oh, that's kind of like a little lazy, and I'll just kind of leave it at that because I don't want to dive into spoiler territory. So before I give you all my overall thoughts, my score, and let you know if this is worth checking out, make sure to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. With all that being said, overall, the Saw fan in me can appreciate certain aspects of this movie. For example, the impressive, brutal nature of the traps, the original score, the nod to the original, and I welcome the sense of levity that was given in this film. The critic side of me can't unfortunately ignore the unoriginal story. The script was weak. The story just wasn't that cohesive at points. There were moments where there were unintentional comedic performances, and again, I think that the ending was very predictable and quite lazy in my opinion. So with that being said, as a Saw fan, but also being, you know, a movie critic of sorts, I'm gonna say Spiral, the Book of Saw. I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5. Now, it's not the worst Saw film. I don't think it is anywhere in the same class as the first three. I would say, for me, if I were to rank the Saws right now, I would say 1, 3, 2, 4, this film, and then you can just put 5 through 8 and just mix them all in a bowl. I think the 8th one is the worst one of the entire franchise. So again, I would say that after 4, I will put Spiral after that. So that cracks my top 5 in the Saw franchise. And then ultimately, do I want to see more in this franchise? Not based on that ending. I would like to see them just harken back to the original, give me back the original Saw voice, bring back Billy the puppet, and just you know, try to find that balance, because I thought the comedy was welcome, but then the seriousness of the nature, just the performances, let's get a little bit some better actors in the supporting cast roles in these Saw films. But that's just my thoughts on the movie. Again, if they do have a Saw show, they're gonna do a 10th one, I'm gonna check it out regardless. Again, I'm like a thrill seeker. I'm always seeking that next Saw film because I'm a fan of the franchise. And for my fans of the franchise, you're gonna see this movie regardless, even if I give it a 1 out of 5, which I didn't. But for newcomers, I don't think this is the film that's gonna make them excited for the Saw franchise. So that's just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, make sure to share the video, like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments. Again, your pros, your cons, where this film ranks for you, your favorite trap in this film, and if you're excited for more of the Saw franchise, let's talk about it all in the comments. Hope you all are staying safe. Hope you enjoyed this review. We'll see you in the next video.